Your turn.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I talk about Nishida and architecture, and in the abstract, it said that I will say much about critical regionalism. Now I looked at what I'm going to say. It takes a bit longer, the general things, but I think it's worthwhile. So the critical regionalism will come at the end and will be a little bit shorter. So, in principle, it makes sense to look at Nishida and architecture because the basho is place, so it's spatial. How can it be related to architecture? Have architects been inspired by it? Maybe before starting this, one should say that the word architecture, the concept of architecture in Japan was not well known during most of Nishida's lifetime. Kenshiku means building construction. It has been introduced around 1900. Before it was Zoka, which literally means house making, which is a very nice word. It makes you think of building, of bauen, as Heidegger. What Heidegger has in mind. It was then around 1900 when Nishida was 30 that the Architectural Society of Japan named itself Kenshiku Gakkai from Zoka Gakkai. So that is just an interesting thing I find, because Heidegger didn't have much feeling for architecture. He didn't think that it's very helpful for understanding what a building is or what a place is. So this idea of house making. Japanese architecture emerged after the Second World War, and though Nishida was then no longer alive, it has impacted, at least indirectly, post-war architects like Arata Isozaki. And because it's Japanese, one can say that indirectly one can find such ideas in a range of other architects. I don't want to do just name dropping because I cannot talk about all of them anyway, except Ando. Tadao Ando is certainly then the most obvious case. There is Ryuichi Hamaguchi. I will talk about him later. It's maybe the most important architectural historian of the generation after the war. And he said that it's impossible to understand the rise of modern architecture in the West without some reference to the architecture of Japan. He found that Western architects are looking at Japan, learning from it, so that somehow maybe Nishida is even flowing into Western architecture. But I want to see if this is true. So what would that architecture be that is inspired by Nishida? It will be inspired by Zen Buddhism. What does it mean? Zen Buddhism emphasizes experiential understanding over intellectual knowledge, or it tries to transcend conceptual thinking. And this, of course, must have repercussions on the experience of space and on the experience of architecture or built environments. So this emphasis on experience that can inspire all architects who are interested in how the inhabitants are living, interested in their habits, in their rituals, and do not just look at universal ideas, because Zen is critical of rationalism and also of objective materialistic perspectives. So it can well confront modern architectural works that are often found alienating because of certain spatial conditions. So Zen Buddhism uses the idea of nothingness, of mu or emptiness, ku, to refer to the inherent lack of existence in all phenomena. Now, this negating philosophical stance, one is tempted to relate that to minimalism, and that exists in the West. There is a Western minimalism. On the one hand, this is true because there is a reduction, but then on the other hand, the idea of negation in Buddhism or in Zen Buddhism is not just a simple reduction. It is not just a cancellation of signifiers, and that's what minimalism in the West often means. Eventually, mu and ku are religious concepts that depend on sunyata, which is a Buddhist, Hinduist concept. And that dismantles typically Western objective thinking, and this with the binary logic. It means that finally it also dismantles the logic of maximalism and minimalism. Something turned black here? No, okay. No. In Zen Buddhism, sunyata became central, and nothingness dissolves not only what I said before, minimalism, maximalism, but a whole range of other distinctions like the sensible, the non-sensible, the aestheton, the noeton, realism, idealism, subjective, dramatic, comic, I think. And then work and play. I work on this a little. Concepts that can be traced to Platonian, Aristotelian distinctions will be questioned. There is the static versus the dynamic, the limited versus the unlimited, visible versus invisible, abstract versus concrete. So you see that Zen architecture cannot be summarized as just minimalism. There's another important fact. In Japan, there was no real equivalent of the concept of technology. European thought could easily develop the idea of technology out of the Greek concept of techne. In the 19th century, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was founded in 1861. But it's a quite new word, and then later Heidegger would say that it hasn't been done in a proper way, that the Greek techne means something else, that it's just not technology. Now, the Japanese word gijutsu, today it's used as technology, but originally it covers the meaning of what Heidegger is driving at. It is technical manufacturing, but also artistic creation. The gi is the skill, and then jutsu is the method. So it is skill, artistic skill supposed to bring about a result. So it bridges the gap between artistic creation and technological production, and this is what Heidegger actually wants, that the techne is a sort of poesis, a sort of bringing forth. So what then about the minimalism? There is the Less is More by Mies van der Rohe, the maybe the most minimalist modern architect. If you go to Chicago, you see almost only his buildings. They all look the same. This aims to create places that are pleasing because of their soberness. Now you see already here there is a problem. You go to a minimalist place and you say, oh, that looks cool. There's nothing. Well, that's not the idea of the Zen Buddhist minimalism. Zen Buddhism is not a wellness philosophy. The basho, I think it was Waldenfels, he called it a placeless place that is impregnated by absolute nothingness. So that's not really the minimalism. There is in self-help. There are self-help books in Japan about the danshari, that you reduce all the clutter, and then you have a better life. You feel better. So that is not the idea of this Zen nothingness. It has nothing to do with the use of natural materials, of neutral colors. Because eventually Zen doesn't want wellness but wants enlightenment. So it clears away things instead of adding more and more. That is true. And so it is a sort of philosophy of subtraction. But one needs to consider a different spiritual context. It is not just aesthetic, but it is religio-aesthetic. So if you look at minimalist buildings by Jean Nouvel, for example, and you compare that with Tadao Ando, you see that both are obviously restrained and somehow minimalistic. But the difference is, I think, that Ando is not just following a code, the code of minimalism. He aims at something else, which is the sublime, and that can be well explained through Nishida's philosophy, I think. So apart from that, other ideas are interesting for architecture. The pure experience, I talked about experience already. The embodied experience, the Ma, the in-betweenness, or Aida from Kimura Bin, which is again in-betweenness, and then Fudo, we heard about that already. Now all these concepts refer to space. Now, it's not as if such things would never have been said in the West. Superficially, Nishida's architectural ideas, they overlap with these phenomenology-inspired studies that are based on Heidegger, on Merleau-Ponty. There is Pallasmaa, there is Christian Norberg-Schulz. Of course, there are resemblances. They all focus on human experience, on time, and on bodily engagement. But still, I think the Zen Buddhist stance makes Nishida's philosophy of space distinct. Just because this socio-historical world that he talks about is a place of nothingness. Now we have to see what that actually means. Well, in the first place, it means that it is designed to produce an immediate selfless encounter. Now, I don't know if we find that in Pallasmaa, in Merleau-Ponty, to some extent, but not that much. I think we don't find it at all in Heidegger, which is his three articles on architecture. It's a kind of romanticization of the rural and of low-tech. So there is not this nothingness in there. So what do these philosophers that I just mentioned, what do they say, most generally speaking? Well, there is the temporality, where we'll talk about a lot about that. Then there is the ocular centrism. Things are not just seen, but where there is the temporality, things are always seen in time. If we see a cube, it takes us time to understand that it is a cube, because we have to look at it from different sides. If we look at it just from the front, it looks like a square. So to see that it's a cube, you have to go a little bit around it. So the temporality comes with human experience. There is Ingrid Helsing Almaas, I think she is Norwegian, She said that to create something that could be called architecture and not just building, you need to look beyond the three physical dimensions and find a way to incorporate human experience, that is the dimension of time. So this is what Nishida would say too. Then Nishida talks about the body and about the haptic, tactile perception. That has been on the agenda of many architectural critics. Now you have to consider that they came up with it maybe 60 years later or 70, 80 years later. It's quite amazing that Nishida talks about the haptic. You have Germano Böhme, Gen Pallasma, many others who insist on the body. On the sensory perception, and so I have a quote here from Nishida from this article basho that is very old. He says, "Our world of sensory perception is constituted where visual and tactile sensations come together." This idea became very popular since 2000, as if it's something new. The philosophy of place of Nishida is haptic, temporal, not only because it speaks against the world as an image conception that we have in modern capitalism. I just say it like this, one could prove it, one could for examples, but I think you know what I mean, that everything is visual. We look at screens even in our hand, and instead of looking at the real thing, we look at the image. That is one thing against this ocular centrism. But then also, I think Nishida would speak up against postmodernism, against surface design that works with columns, with arches, symbols, historical quotations. Just because they are not bodily and haptic, in that sense, they are not real. It's a very Buddhist way of thinking because all these items, like the columns and the arches, they are matter of cognition and of semiotics, whereas hapticity can circumvent that. It is touching things, and therefore it becomes a purer kind of experience. So Nishida would certainly be against all architecture that is just a matter of intellectual communication. Now, at the same time, it will not be, if you would build a house, it would not be, I think, a cozy place of wellness where all these signifiers have been stylized to look more minimalistic, maybe more meaningful, more pleasant. I think, I will come back to this later, I think if Heidegger would have been an architect, his buildings would always have looked a little bit unheimlich, a little bit uncanny to some extent. Because of this anti-semiotic turn, which comes so naturally in Buddhist context. You have to consider that Buddhism thinks that the liberation from the attachment to signifiers, to signifying elements, is very essential. So, but what do you have then? Well, then I think you have something that is a little bit uncanny. I will talk about that. I think it will be something like brutalism. So these surface devices, columns, arches, statues, they are not real for Nishida because they cannot be experienced in a pure, pre-reflexive or bodily way. They are quasi-concepts. There are semiotic citations that cannot be seen through the body. And then, so you see, a philosophy of nothingness is very radical because it wants to experience, have a bodily experience before the conceptualization of architecture. So why the body? Well, the body is not an ego, is not an ego cogito. It is not extensionless. It is not confined in itself, but there is always an intercorporality because we meet other bodies, living or non-living bodies. I think this is again something that many Japanese, Chinese philosophers said. There is Kwangmin Wu. I don't know if you know him. He had the term body thinking in Taoism. He's a great specialist of Taoism. He says that the body thinks and the mind disappears into it. So can we make pure experience in built environments? Pure experience implies the negation of all subjective points of view, of Cartesian, empathetic, scientific points of view, and enables an immediacy that is called an embodied experience. Now, again, it leads to minimalism, but it's not just a simplified experience. The world that is experienced in a pure way is not a flat reality, but on the contrary, it tries to re-establish architecture as a complex ontological unity. For example, it will not be conceptualized in an ocular-centric fashion, but it will be perceived as light, materiality, temperature, because you touch it. You can touch with your eyes. There's a lot of literature on that since 2000 in film studies. Touching doesn't only mean touch with your hand, but there's a haptic gaze. There is a difference between seeing and understanding the concept and then seeing and thinking, what am I actually seeing here? That is the haptic gaze. And you look at the surface, you try not to decipher the symbols, but you try to see what is the material like. So, of course, it aligns with the phenomenology of Merleau-Ponty, of Zumthor, Pallasmaa, maybe with all phenomenology, because phenomenology tries to have this unobstructed vision and have a direct seeing prior to divisions into spiritual and sensory. This is the phenomenological reduction that wants to see the essence of things through immediate and intuitive rather than through intellectually constructed methods. But I think Nishida is more radical than that. Because the body comes in a much more dramatic way. So immediate experience, pure experience, is not the experience that we have in multimedia shows, where you have this in many museums in the world now. They give you the goggles, sometimes without goggles, maybe with images projected all around you, and they plunge you into Van Gogh's cornfield or sunflower field, and then you really understand what that painting is. Because before you were just looking at it, now you are standing inside the painting. Well, that must really give you some insights. Well, I think it doesn't give you insights at all, because it's a completely wrong approach. Think of you can transfer this to architectural simulation, AI-led architectural design. Well, what is wrong with it? I think there is what is lacking is a certain combination of actuality and nothingness that is essential for pure experience in Nishida's sense. Because contrary of what many people might think, Nishida's pure experience is not a matter of directness, of literalism. It's not a direct experience at all. It makes sense if you think of the haptic. The haptic is not direct. Because when you touch with your hands, well, at least the item is an arm's length away. It does not come so close to your eyes directly into your mind. It is just this lack of immediacy that enables haptic vision. And this contrasts with this overdrawn, intense affectivity that we have in immersive devices, which are just not bodily at all. Because the distance is lacking, the immersion eludes the body and also reflection, critical analysis. And who says that this is not important for experience? Of course it is important. They are essential for pure experience. If you think of contemplation in Plotinus way, Plotinus sense. So another way of saying all this, you can say that these immersive Van Gogh events, they attempt to transform images into spaces, but not into places. Places are always bodily tactile phenomena, and they need to be perceived with a distanced haptic gaze. We can also say that we are immersed in these events, but not in the same way in which we are immersed in games. Those who know me, they know that this is my favorite topic. I cannot talk for half an hour without mentioning the game, the play. You see that in the play we play, we are immersed. At the same time, we know that it's only a game. We are distanced. Another way is the atmosphere. In an atmosphere, the basho, I think, is a sort of atmosphere. We are immersed in it. We are surrounded by the atmosphere, but it is not a container. It doesn't function as a container. We are not surrounded by an atmosphere in the same way in which we are standing in the sunflower field in this immersive experience. That sunflower field that we are standing in, I think the problem is just that it has no atmosphere. So the atmospheric immersion is more contemplative. We are in an atmosphere. At the same time, we feel that we are not completely taken over. We are not completely part of it. There's always a kind of distance. Minimalism again. When Ando decides, Tadao Ando, he decides to be a minimalist, but not in a non-bodily and image-oriented way. He doesn't want to provide superficial comfort. He says, more important than social, functional, or aesthetic imperatives is the clarity of one's logic. Now that sounds completely like Nishida. Nishida says, I looked up the sentence, we cannot determine basho by means of so-called logical form. Instead, it's basho that establishes logical form. This is the idea that we talked about this, and maybe I can come to this later. Then that the architect listens to the place. Louis Kahn listened to the brick. So the brick tells him what the logic is. The place establishes the logic. He is not bringing his outside logic into the place. Now, the incapacity to grasp the distinctness of these two kinds of minimalism, I think it is much due to the obsession to distinguish architecture from art. In art, art can be disquieting, unheimlich, shattering, very creative, but architecture is not art. Architecture should be functional, and then even if it's not functional, it should rational in the sense that it provides some comfort, which is also a sort of function. There's always this idea of utility. You have this in Loos, who was very much against art, so the ornament must be overcome. And then we have an architecture that is more minimalist, when we take out all these ornaments, when we take out the art. And then what happens then? Well, then we feel better. Well, that's not the idea of Nishida's or even Tadao Ando's minimalism. That the artist can experiment with new ideas, but the architect must provide for the needs of society. He must respect the history. Even Heidegger's dwelling is inscribed in that logic. I don't think that he wants to bring too much art into the house. He thinks of it in terms of dwelling, which is still, in the last instance, a sort of function. Now you have to consider that in Japanese culture originally there was no word neither for architecture nor for art. So, of course, they saw things differently. There's not the idea that art can act out its wildest fantasy and architecture must be a comfort zone. What we find hidden in even in Heidegger and other laws, for example, what is in there is still this Platonic distinction between reality and appearance. Art is only creating appearances, and there you can do whatever you want. But don't make it real. And architecture is real. Don't bring it into architecture, because then that is real, and there we don't want all your crazy things that you have imagined in art, which creates only illusions. So architecture is a real life, and we don't want to be too much challenged by art. So I think all this is somehow contained in the sentence, ornament is crime. So in Tadao Ando's minimalist buildings, we do not find this emotionally soothing atmosphere that minimalism tends to produce in the West. There is a physical and carnal quality in Ando's buildings, and it's not calming. Well, it is maybe calming, but it is also demanding. There is a feeling of the nothing in there, and the nothing cannot be comforting in the wellness sense. If you look at spatial conceptions in no theater, Comparu, who wrote this most important book, maybe, he says, elegance is born when the ordinary is abbreviated, concentrated, and reduced to essentials. Now, this is not just less is more in Mies van der Rohe's sense. In the West, the big difference is that in the West, the less is meant to be a substance. In the same way that when you are an ascetic, you want to gain a substantial quality of life, and you repress the superfluous, and then as a reward, you get a certain substance, the substance of minimalism. Concept of Ma, well, I bring it up now for the first time, but you know what Ma is, that is used in no place. It seeks rather a balance between the object and the place, between action and inaction, sound, silence. And this balance is not a pleasant compromise, because it just sounds better when you are somehow between the extremes. But this balance between action and inaction, it produces a pause. That means a nothingness, a disruption. through a certain cut. Kisho Kurokawa, the Japanese architect, he talks about the Senohima, which is something similar, and he relates it to a modern architecture. So let's say, what kind of architecture would Nishida have built? People have often wondered about that. What would philosophers build? What would Descartes have built? What would Sartre have built? Well, we know what Heidegger would have built. It would have been some Black Forest hat. For Nishida, I think the most. This is my personal opinion. Other people will say something else. It's not entirely serious. I'm just saying this now. I think the two options are metabolism or brutalism. Both have a strong relationship with Buddhism. Metabolism is a very Japanese thing. It's a philosophy of symbiosis between humans and technology, between nature and civilization. These metabolist buildings, well, now I could have brought some pictures, but well, you know them. They replicate biological functions, so they replicate something natural, but they bring it into the city. So that could be an option. But I think more likely is brutalism. And the significance of brutalism, well, first, it's very popular in Japan, and then there is a link with Buddhism, which is another topic. But again, we have here two kinds of minimalism. Brutalism is a sort of minimalism. But it's not what Isozaki calls the Japonica minimalism. This is what the Westerners saw when they went to Japan, and they went to the Katsura imperial villa, and they looked at the shoji, and what they actually saw was Mondrian. They said, this is so cool. Everything is geometrical here. You see, this is not brutalism. This is the other kind of minimalism. The other kind of minimalism, the brutalist one, is what Isozaki called Dionysian, and the other one is Apollinian. Now, Isozaki finds that the Dionysian is the real Japanese one. It is not clear, but in the contrary, it's a little bit confusing. You are asking yourself, what is going on here? It's difficult to classify, to explain what is the concept. Why are people producing something like brutalism? I think that would be Nishida's architecture. So here at the end, I come now to the topic of critical regionalism. I don't know how well you are informed about that. It's an architectural current which is not just regional, but says that the regionalist architecture must be critical. He will not just reproduce vernacular architecture. But there's an encounter of modernity and the traditional. He is rather vernacularizing modernity itself. He transforms universal forms through an encounter with specific places. That is the definition of critical regionalism. Now, first of all, I think the Kyoto school can associate it with that, because somehow we're trying to modernize indigenous culture. It is an exercise in critical intercultural communication, and clearly it is critical. Nishida has really organicist definitions of place and of the locality, because in the place, in the basho, the world establishes itself. There is a certain idea of something organic. And then the basho is a place, then a locus. That means there is a locality. It must always be something local, but at the same time there's another perspective of this locality. Instead of just reproducing it in a literal way, something else comes in, something critical. So one could call it critical regionalism. These local places, if we think of the philosophy of basho, how can we link it to a local place? Well, first, local places would not be seen as static. They develop constantly. They are not artisanal places. They are not idyllic, but they constantly develop. Then the basho is never a pre-established reality that exists just for itself. It cannot just look inward and then say, now we know what is authentic and we will reproduce this literally and forever. It develops just because it looks outward. Nishida says this even in his late articles on the kokutai, which is on the nation, and they are not well regarded because it looks a little bit old-fashioned, as if he's going back to Tönnies, to Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, but he's actually not really doing this if you read it carefully. He says that when a nation is established, people should not look inward towards their ethnic origin, towards authenticity, and repeat this again and again, but they should look outward to develop their identities through a contact with the outside world. You have your identity not because you are looking at your ancestors and at your ethnic outfit and everything that is proper to your environment, but your identity is established because you are looking at other people, at other cultures, at other architectural styles, and then also at other times. You should not just go backward. So a nation produces its natural style in that way. To confirm the authentic is not enough for the production of a national style. So then the basho, that is the third point, is constitutive of our existence, but at the same time it transcends what we can really grasp of it. I just have to move it around because I see that I have to plug the computer in. Okay, I go here. Battery is getting empty. Okay. So we do not know exactly what a nation is. Its essence, the essence of a nation, cannot be empirically spelled out. But at the same time, we know that we are very much determined by it. So that is a contradiction. That is a peculiar existential situation that I think Nishida's philosophy tries to grasp this. Now, this critical regionalism, I said the Kyoto school, there is the romantic school, trying to overcome modernity at the same time being modern at some way. So that was a little bit fashionable in Taisho, in early Showa. So can maybe the whole architecture after World War II then be called critically regionalist? because of this situation. There is this architect, Isozaki, talks about him, Sutemi Horiguchi. He died in 1984. He introduced modern architecture to Japan, but then he merged it with traditional design. That's an early critical regionalist. He did this before the word critical regionalism exists, with this harmonization. But then we can look a little bit deeper into that problem. In the 1930s, Japanese architecture underwent an identity crisis. Now, Horiguchi suggests that architecture should have a style without style. Yoshiki naku yoshiki. Now, is this a profound insight? It seems to precede a little bit what Nishida is doing 10, 15 years later with the katachi, ganai katachi, the formless form. So there was a crisis of architecture. Then one thought there was I mentioned already Hamaguchi. Don't mix him up with Horiguchi. Ryuichi Hamaguchi, the important architectural historian, who thought he had found something like a local style that looks really Japanese. But then after the war, all that was no longer possible. People no longer wanted to hear about that. So maybe then this style without style, the formless form, is maybe a viable alternative. We can see it in the Zen way, the absolute nothingness, which holds that the absolute must always contain the self-negation in itself, or the utsusu, the mirroring, that one looks at the environment through a mirroring. I look at the environment, I see myself, is a very complex idea. Maybe that is the critical regionalism that corresponds to these thoughts, to these Zen thoughts, that the region or the state emerges like an eye without an eye. That means the self is neither submerged in pure subjectivity, nor is it redefined using an objective language. At the same time, the region or the place or the state does not negate itself in order to become just modern, just abstract or depersonalized. This is something in Nishida that is maybe difficult to explain. I will stop with this. That without the negation of the self, of yourself, you cannot be aware of others, but without the awareness of others, you cannot be aware of yourself. That is a contradiction. So if we transfer that to critical regionalism, maybe the styleless place, the style without style, is the only alternative. It means that the architect will build a styleless style because local architecture is not a pre-established reality, but it develops through a mirroring, but it's not a narcissistic kind of mirroring. It is more, it will create an existential style, and this can be very well integrated into theories of critical regionalism. Okay, thank you very much.
And I see Yoko Arisaka wants to put the first question. Yoko, please.
Hi, Thorsten. Thanks very much. As usual, you have wildly interesting ideas in many ways. My question has to do with a possible contradiction that arises in critical regionalism. I mean, if you look at Ando, for instance, no? The big Nishida the Nishida building in Kanazawa, on the one hand, okay, so the idea theoretically makes kind of sense, yeah, this identity of nothingness and being as that can be possibly accommodated in these regional thinking. There's the local and the most universal, like nothingness as form. But the if you look at Isozaki, if you look at Ando, it creates the most incongruous kind of, as you said, demanding now, a thing, the real thing as material in the environment. So it's actually becomes very foreign to the environment itself, right? So it's not so much the integration into the regional aspects and so on and so forth. That's not at all the case. So would you say something that's something like, well, that is the absolute contradiction, the identity of absolute contradiction, or something along those lines? I mean, now I think the theoretical expression could make sense, but yeah, I guess my question is, how do you then accommodate the real building in this?
Well, well, let's first say Ando is not a critical regionalist. He refuses this label. Other people say that he is, but there are some reasons. And then Isozaki is something very different. He's a real semiotician. If you think of the Mickey Mouse ears, he has one building. He is the person with pillars and columns everywhere. But no, I mean, I think I want to answer your question, which is really is a very essential question. But I think one has to answer this in a Zen way. Of course, so the architect builds something according to these principles, and the result can be that the building fits into the environment. But maybe it doesn't. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's critical regionalist, that is okay. And he does whatever he wants. He just needs to have the right attitude. He needs to consider all these principles. But looking at the environment and say, well, now I should rather do this. Well, that would already be a wrong approach. It doesn't mean that he should ignore the environment. Many buildings that ignore the environment are very interesting, like Zaha Hadid, because we have to go to an extreme. But well, I don't. She's nothing to do with critical regionalism. But in the end, everything is possible. You cannot say that the one is bad because the building standing next to it doesn't match. Well, it can also be that can be interesting. Maybe it's good that it doesn't match, and it would be a very bad building if it would have matched. So in the end, there's nothing, the question cannot really be answered, you see.
Jim?
Yes, it's always interesting to listen to you, Thorsten, and I really applaud your attempt to draw these connections between the architecture and some key ideas in Nishida. My burning question that's been in my mind since the beginning is there any sense in which you can say that Nishida's thought might guide an architect's work? Or does it just offer one way of explaining certain architects' vision and construction for the rest of us? Does it answer a question that architects actually have? Or does it offer architects a way to question their own work that would be useful for the architects? To be more specific, you referred from the beginning and throughout to the theory of basho. Basho is a theory of metaphysics based on a logic of dialectics, where each place discloses a contradiction that the larger, embracing, enveloping space resolves only to create another contradiction until it gets to the universal of all universals beyond all contradiction. But it's not about physical space. No, it's about abstraction from space. There is no space in Nishida's basho except to the very lowest first level of objects in the world. There's no Ma. There's not even a universal of the natural world. The historical world is the basho of ideas, logic, of thought. So I think this jump from basho to the idea of architectural space seems to me a little big. That's the specific question I have. But then the bigger question is there any sense in which Nishida's work could be actually useful to a functioning architect in their designing or construction vision?
Yeah, I don't think I agree. Nishida talks so much about bodily experience. Now, if the basho is purely metaphysical, why would he talk about that? You say historical is also
no. It's a model of, it's a theory of universals. Okay, where do you put the universal of body? I mean, he's not talking about actual body, but the universal of poiesis. Where does that belong, for example? Well, it's a logic, an ontology, logic. So of course it has the physical body is in there and touch is in there, but it's not about space. I mean, this is one of the things Nishida complained that people misunderstood. They thought basho was about places, and it's not about places. Well, anyway, that's
it means place. Of course, it's a very abstract philosophy, but it can be used. It can be like any ontology. I mean, what is you can take Heidegger's philosophy, not just his 3 articles on architecture, but you can take being and time, and then say how that has a meaning for architecture. It doesn't have to be something concrete in the philosophy. And the fact that basho means place, I think it is very close to use it for thoughts about how can a place should a place look like? What is a concrete place?
It's curious that he doesn't actually do that. I mean, he talks about time as a union of opposites and so forth, but a space is a union of opposites. I found that curious. So it seems to me as if he's kind of removed from the place that the architect begins work. But I mean, you've used Nishida for this, so maybe.
Thank you for the talk. Actually, I've not read Nishida. I only read Inquiry into the Good and No More. So I was. It was very inspiring, and I want to look into Nishida, but his Nishida is very much I know. But I'm curious. What did you read? First, read Nishida, and then think, yes, this is the content here. That you after into critical realism, or did you have critical realism as an interest in reading Nishida yourself? Because in a talk, it's not that easy to follow what of this is your interpretation of what Nishida wrote about in this, and what is, as Hasim asked, what would Nishida say himself? So I'm a bit curious. I'm very inspired to look more into Nishida, but I'm also curious about your approach to linking it to this critical regionalism.
Well, I of course Nishida came first with Enrico 30 years ago in Kyoto. We were reading Nishida, and I was doing that for many years. And then one day I thought, maybe through Ando, that one can say something here. One can link it to to architecture, and it hasn't been done very much, which is surprising. What has been done more is Kimura Bin, Aida, and then Fudo. There is a link. It might have to do with what Jim said, that it appears to be something completely different. But I think it can be done. I would still say I see the problem, but I think it can be done. So your questions, I read Nishida. There was a long interruption. I did not read Nishida for many years, but then I came back to him, and then came the architecture.
Because I recognize several architectural kind of thoughts of architecture relevant concept in also inquiring to the good. But I must read it again to see where it was. So I recognize some of the things that I thought of when reading Imanishi about architecture or thinking about architecture and Matsushi. So there is all of this has some writings that you as architect see. And what I was curious about is a conference in Edinburgh last year. It was a lot about Matsushi, but no comment at all about what he wrote about the kind of the real world, about architecture, about place. So I think being an architect, you read things differently from being philosophers. Philosophers look at this pattern of the abstract world, and they won't stay there. Where architects were kind of the opposite, to look what of this in this for me to think of architecture. And of course, the question is, can that be direct address to design? No, I think that is more like the ornithologue and the bird a bit. It is a theory about design. The architect himself are seldom that fond of being or sticking to a theory, but nevertheless, the theory can be useful for understanding works, as I myself try to do. So again, thank you. You were into a lot of interesting aspects of architecture. So I will look into Nishida from my perspective.
So thank you, Thorsten. Just one thing. So I found your talk very inspiring. For example, your reference to the haptic element in Nishida's philosophy, and possibly in Nishida's
which elements?
Haptic. This is, I think, I agree completely. Is very important, and haptic also. I think something similar to how Derrida used this concept in, for example, the Fouché. And this could be something to do with the idea of haptic also in Nishida, I guess, recently. And for example, when you said combine actuality and nothingness together, this is, I think, it's very near to how I would think about Nishida. But I hope we have other occasion to speak more about this. I want to just ask you one thing to you. Did you visit Nishida's house in Kamakura? Because you asked how would Nishida build us. There is in Kamakura. There is his last house. The house, by the way, where he also died. It is a house he bought from Iwanami Shigeo, the Iwanami publisher, and where he spent his last days or years of his life. So what I found interesting or surprising is not the house itself, because he didn't build the house. The house was already built. It was half Japanese, half Western. The last house of a valley going into a forest. But what is funny for me is that Nishida, in that house, the same as in the house he had in Kyoto, you can see some picture of the house in Kyoto. This house doesn't exist anymore. what Nishida did is to add a new part of the house that is shosai, is the place where he went to think and to write. So he added another part. In the house of Kyoto is in the garden. But in the house of Kamakura is on the roof of the house. So he built a tower, and so he had to go on the stairs, very steep, and then you find a very really small room that, in my memory, is maybe 3 meters and 3 meters, a square, empty, with only a very low dish on the tatami and completely open, and then only with the roof, and then you can see the ocean, and then on the in front of you, and then on the right side and left side you have a forest. So what is for me interesting is this part of the house, inside the house or outside, and this is the place where Nishida doesn't dual in the sense to spend his daily life, but at the same time is one part of his daily life is the place where he went to think or to write. And so I found very strange to build a kind of annex which is inside at the same time outside your house, over the house, and close and open at the same time. And this place is place of thought, of thinking, of writing. So this is was for me very strange. And yes, but I would like to discuss about it or to hear your opinion. But maybe it's better next time when we meet again, or if we go to Kamakura together to see this strange house.
I looked up the pictures. I saw all the pictures of the two houses, but it didn't seem very particularly interesting to me on the pictures.
Exactly.
So one has to go there.
Yes, but what is for me interesting that Nishida felt the need to add a new part just to write, to think. And this part is inside, outside at the same time, like a continuous discontinuity with the place where you are living. And another interesting point from this window, it's not a window because it was open. You look to the ocean. The ocean is probably 50 meters, 500 meters, 600 meters in front of you. And at the time of Nishida, there was a German-like farm there. So from his window, you see the sea, but near to the sea, cows and a German-like house in Kamakura. So I thought it's also very interesting to understand modern Japan or. So, but anyway, I stopped my unuseful comment. So thank you, Thorsten, and thank you to everyone, to the pre-speaker. I think it was really a great workshop.
Thank you. Yeah.